An icon of post-Cold War aviation, the F-16 is an American-made, single-engine, multi-role fighter adapted for a variety of missions and used at some point by the air forces of 28 nations, making it the most numerous fighter in service today. Its high maneuverability and surprising combat endurance makes it a top-tier dogfighter, even as the world begins to move to 5th-generation aircraft, while new munitions and modernizations like the Havglass 5 scheme will ensure that Falcons and their derivatives will still be gracing our skies decades from now. The kit for this build is from Tamiya and is almost indisputably the best offering for a fighting Falcon in this scale. Just like with propeller aircraft, our journey begins in the cockpit. I clip out the parts and clean them up and assemble them using some super thin glue. At this point, however, I don't remove the ejector seat or dashboard. This is because in reality, a modern ejector seat is a complex thing which represents opportunity for lots of detail, so I'd be saving it for later. Once the rest of the cockpit was assembled, I spray it all with a grey shade, paint in the grips of the levers and button panels with black, and then dry brush the panels to bring out the texture. The next section to work on was the main landing gear bay. I clip out, clean and assemble the parts I need before giving the whole section a coat with white spray paint. I chose a spray can here as it would provide an easy and durable layer without needing to do several coats like a white painter my airbrush would need. Once the spray had dried, I painted in some small details using a paintbrush. One last part needing pre-painting is the forward fuselage. I cut it out and cover the external areas with masking putty, allowing me to spray black over the canopy mechanism and grey on the interior walls. With that done, the fuselage could be assembled up to the next sub-assembly. The parts are cleaned and assembled using super thin glue, and the cockpit walls sprayed with grey. Once this dried, I could glue the wheel well into the lower fuselage and glue the two halves together with thick cement. Once this had dried properly, I could then assemble the rest of the aircraft up to the next painting stage. With modern jet models, be sure to place weights of some kind in the nose to ensure that it isn't back heavy. In this case, I used some leftover gates from metal miniatures that I had lying around. I also assembled the exhaust at this stage, although I was going to paint it separate. For now, I left the external equipment and wheels on the sprue. Next, it was time to begin the painting process. I used some masking putty to fill in the painted areas and spray a primer across the whole surface. This would reveal surface imperfections that needed addressed, as well as providing a better surface for the paint to stick to. After the primer had dried, I painted in the main three-tone camouflage. I begin with the lighter grey on the forward fuselage, before masking the brake and painting in the darker grey across the remainder of the top surfaces. Finally, once this had dried, I could mask off and paint the light grey on the lower surface. While painting, I found that the light ghost grey I was using pulled in a strange way and required a lot of corrective work afterwards. I'm not sure if this is a problem with my bottle, or if the colour always does this, but I'd suggest buying some from another manufacturer instead. I could then paint in some additional details that would be hard to do with an airbrush, such as the outer wing pylons and some small metallic details, as well as painting in the nose cone. Important to note here is that the nose cone colour is different across the three schemes in the box, so be sure to reference a guide when painting your own. After spraying a coat of gloss varnish, I could then apply the decals. I use some decal setting chemicals to make them sit properly, and then once they're applied I spray a layer of matte varnish. There are a lot of small labels on this plane, so make sure to get them all. I then apply a black oil wash to add some definition to the panel lines. I leave it to dry for 1 day, then clean the excess with a paper towel. I then let it fully dry for 1 more day before sealing in with some matte varnish. As this all dried, I began to work on the parts of the model I had missed out. I started with the exhaust, painting in the grey with my airbrush before using a paintbrush to paint in the metallics, and gluing it in with superglue. Some of the footage here is a bit scuffed. I was in the middle of moving as I finished filming the video, and so some angles or background items are in the wrong place, and I apologise for that. After gluing in the engine, I do the landing gear and gear doors and glue them in as well. The penultimate stage is to weather the plane. Originally, I'd planned for this to be quite clean, but after some mishaps of the underside, I decided to add more dirt. I paint streaks on using brown oil paint, before blending them with a brush and some cotton tips. After this, I leave the plane to dry for 2 days. The final stage is to add the external equipment. An F-16 can carry a wide variety of equipment, so it's important to ensure you build the right stuff here. As the aircraft I'd modelled was part of a Wild Weasel SEAD squadron, I assembled it with the appropriate loadout, that being tanks on the inner pylons, harms on the middle, AMRAAMs on the outer pylons, and sidewinders on the wingtips. Once the equipment is painted, I superglue it into place and spray the aircraft with a final coat of matte varnish. Then, I mask and paint the canopy, glue it on with PVA glue, and the project is done.